After joint US-Israeli strikes, Iran thought it had the answers. A wave of drone and missile strikes rocked US bases throughout the Middle East. The US didn't take it lying down. Iran came back with missiles, and the US retaliated with devastating and instant revenge. US B-2 pilots just did something unbelievable in Iran, and Tehran knows that it's already lost the war. Reeling from a devastating blitz of American and Israeli strikes that reportedly saw the US carry out 900 strikes in the first 12 hours of its operation, along with Israel bombing Iran 1,200 times in 24 hours, Iran knew it had to strike back. It tried, but it couldn't hit the aircraft flying overhead. They're too fast, too well coordinated, and simply too good for Iran's weakened air defenses. But what Iran could do is use its missiles to attack targets that aren't zipping along at speeds that are faster than sound. Stationary targets. Targets like US air bases. Unleashing a wave of missiles and drones, Iran targeted a slew of US bases throughout the Middle East, instantly transforming a countrywide conflict into a war that is affecting the entire region. France 24 has the details in a February 28th article, where it outlines what Iran hit or tried to hit. In Bahrain, which is home to the US Navy's 5th Fleet as well as US Naval Forces Central Command, Iran targeted the service center for the US 5th Fleet. Grey plumes of smoke have been seen rising from near the base, which is home to a deep-water port that can accommodate US aircraft carriers. In Iraq, where the US still has forces based in the autonomous Kurdish region, explosions were recorded near the US consulate in Erbil. However, the Kurdish security forces saw that the US managed to intercept drones and missiles that flew over Erbil. Then on to Jordan's Muwafaq Salti airbase, where the US has deployed dozens of military aircraft. According to early reporting, 2 ballistic missiles were shot down, with only material damage caused. It keeps on going, and if you keep watching, you're going to learn what the US did to avenge these strikes. Moving to Kuwait, which hosts a number of US bases, along with depots containing stockpiles of equipment and supplies for US forces, Iranian missiles targeted the Ali al-Salem airbase. They were mostly intercepted, though Italy, which also has Air Force personnel at the base, says that Iran managed to damage a key runway. Explosions were also recorded close to the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, which is home to forward components of US Central Command, or CENTCOM. Iran also appears to have targeted the Qatari capital of Doha with an attack. In the United Arab Emirates, which is home to the Al Dhafra Air Base that hosts the US 380th Air Expeditionary Wing, 2 witnesses claim that they have seen smoke rising from the base following a small series of explosions. 2 rounds of Iranian missiles were reportedly intercepted in the UAE, though debris from the destruction of the first wave is reported to have killed a civilian. And finally, in Syria, an Iranian missile killed 4 civilians, though the US is reportedly in the process of withdrawing its troops from that country. This was a massive Iranian attack, a desperate attempt to project power after the US and Israel combined to take out over 1,000 targets on Iranian soil in one day. The US has suffered casualties as a result of Iran's missile-laden response. CENTCOM has confirmed that 3 US service members have been killed in action during what the US is now calling Operation Epic Fury. Another 5 sustained serious injuries, and US President Donald Trump had cautioned that the lives of American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. The US wanted revenge. It got it by using one of the most powerful aerial assets in its arsenal, the B-2 Spirit bomber. On March 1st, the War Zone, or TWZ, reported that America's B-2s had entered the air campaign against Iran. Flying from their base in Whiteman, Missouri, these stealthy bombers reached Iranian airspace during the early hours of March 1st. And when they arrived, they unleashed hell. Iran's missile caves were their biggest targets, and we'll be explaining why the B-2 was the right aircraft for that particular job in just a few moments. These facilities, which are built deep into Iran's mountains, are typically used to store missiles. However, some also have the ability to launch ballistic missiles through fissures built into the underground facilities, which makes them a double threat. The US logic here is simple. Take out the caves and you destroy Iran's missiles, as well as its ability to launch them. Iran takes a lot of pride in these missile caves. Almost a year ago, in late March 2025, the Iranian regime even released an 85-second video showcasing the caves and some of Iran's more advanced missiles and rockets. Again, this was a projection of power, or at least it was supposed to be. Iran's issue was that its propaganda video showcased a major problem that a country that has bunker-busting bombs like the US could exploit. Missiles were being stored out in the open in the missile caves, with seemingly no blast doors or other protective measures that would guard the caves if one of those missiles exploded. A chain reaction would be possible with the right strike, TWZ reported in March 2025. All it would take is the right match to light the fuse, and the missile caves would come crumbling down. The US had just the right match in the B-2 Spirit. America's most impressive stealth bomber was the perfect choice for the revenge it took on Iran, and not just because it has the bunker-busting bombs needed to cause a chain reaction of explosions in Iran's missile caves. Those caves have another vulnerability. They don't even need to be destroyed completely to be taken offline. All the US had to do was seal them off by striking entrances and the fissures built into the caves, which reduces Iran's ability to use its massive stockpiles. After that, surveillance and repeated strikes to take out any openings that Iran tries to form put the US in a position where it can attack elsewhere in the country while minimizing Iran's attempts to retaliate. So the strategy was in place. The B-2 bombers had arrived. All the US had to do was light the match. Before we get to that, let's look at what the B-2 Spirit brings to the fight in Iran that no other US aircraft delivers. TWZ's Tyler Roggaway offers some basics in an X-post where he claims that the B-2 makes direct attacks against Iranian targets possible that no other platform can pull off. A single B-2 can carry up to 80 JDAM bombs, each of which weighs 500 pounds, and when dropped in large enough quantities, deliver more than enough firepower to seal off Iran's missile caves, preventing the country's crumbling regime from pulling off a repeat of what it did against US bases across the Middle East. Entire airfields' infrastructure gone on a single pass, is how Roggaway puts it, and when you add MOPs or massive ordnance penetrators into the mix, you get the bunker-busting capabilities that make the B-2 the perfect choice for taking out Iran's missile caves and, if the US chooses, the country's underground missile facilities. Max Afterburner had even more to say. This is what the B-2 does best, going in when it's least expected and hitting sensitive sites so no one sees it coming, and it's complete shock and awe. In other words, the B-2 combines its immense firepower with stealth capabilities that allow it to get in, strike, and get out before Iran knows what hit it. Afterburner adds that it looks like the US deployed 4 to 6 of its B-2s in Iran, and he notes that each is capable of carrying 2 of the 30,000-pound MOPs that are each capable of penetrating over 200 feet and will strike at speeds exceeding 625 miles per hour. The B-2 is the point of the spear for the next phase of America's aerial assault. And in a moment, we're going to reveal precisely what the US pulled off in its revenge strike, as well as what Iran has lost during Operation Epic Fury so far. But before we go deeper into that, if this is the kind of insight that you want, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. When America's B-2s blasted out of Whiteman, Missouri, their pilots knew that they had a 32-hour round trip on their dockets. The UK has denied forward basing, though that may be changing now, as you'll learn if you stick with us. So the bombers had to fly thousands of miles, drop their ordnance, and then fly back, all in one massive trip. The US deployed KC-135 Stratotankers to make up for the lack of forward basing. These enormous aircraft enable aerial refueling, which keeps the B-2s in the skies for as long as the US needs them. Now, we mentioned that the B-2 can be loaded with 500-pound JDAMs and MOPs that can penetrate deep underground, but these weren't the weapons that the US chose to use on March 1st. Remember what we told you about the Iranian missile caves and their key vulnerability earlier in the video? You only need to destroy the entrances, exits, and fissures, and you get a missile cave that becomes a non-factor. The US knew this, so it likely loaded the B-2s with a different type of JDAM. TWZ speculates that this was the Blue 109 warhead that is equipped with the GBU-31 JDAM, which creates a 2,000-pound bunker buster that is more than capable of destroying Iran's missile caves, or at least capable of destroying missile launch apertures and runner entrances that lead into those caves. It looks like TWZ's speculation was correct. In the wake of its B-2 bombing run, CENTCOM announced precisely what the US used. Last night, US B-2 stealth bombers, armed with 2,000-pound bombs, struck Iran's hardened ballistic missile facilities. No nation should ever doubt America's resolve, CENTCOM said in a March 1st X post, which was accompanied by a video showing B-2s in flight. The mention of 2,000-pound bombs in that post suggests that TWZ was right on the money when it speculated on the use of the Blue 109 warhead. And now we're starting to see evidence of the damage that America's B-2s caused. Satellite images are starting to come to light, showcasing what has happened to the missile caves that the US has targeted. Shared by Brady Afric on X, one series of photographs demonstrates that Iran's Tabriz North missile base has been wrecked by the B-2s, with the pictures showcasing the precise types of collapsed tunnel entrances that we told you earlier are enough to put many of these types of bases out of commission. Newsweek reports that the US also appears to have taken out a radar system at Iran's Zahedan airbase, though it's unclear if this was done by the B-2s or if the radar was destroyed as part of the 2,000-plus strikes conducted by the US and Israel during its initial thunderstorm of strikes against Iran. The same outlet reports that Iran's drone and cruise missile storage bunkers in Iraq have been destroyed. What we see here is the systematic destruction of the one major threat that Iran poses to the US. Iran struck US bases with missiles. The US and its B-2s have mostly taken those missiles out of the picture. But beyond that, what this now means is that the US can follow up with more strikes conducted by its carrier-based assets. After all, Iran's ballistic missiles posed a threat to the carriers that the US has stationed in the Persian Gulf. As the US takes Iran's missile threat offline, those carriers can position themselves closer to Iran's territory, which only speeds up the rate of strikes that the US can carry out. Afterburner explains, stating that it's likely F-22s that paved the way for the B-2s that the US unleashed, likely by destroying air defenses and creating safe aerial corridors. Now that Iran's missile caves have collapsed, carrier assets like the F-18s launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln will likely start blasting off every 30 minutes to utterly ruin more of Iran's key military nodes. Israel has also gone all in and will benefit from America's missile cave destruction. Afterburner adds, 200 jets, F-35s, custom Israeli electronic warfare jets, F-15s from Israel, F-15Es from the US, will add to something called Lucas, which is a one-way attack drone that is akin to an upgraded version of Iran's own Shahed 136. So if Iran thought the worst was over following the flight of the B-2s, it is sorely mistaken. Much more is coming. We'll come back to that topic in a few moments, but before we get to that, let's sum up the situation for Iran as it stands right now. On the ballistic missile front, it would be inaccurate to claim that Iran has completely lost the ability to fire missiles at the US, Israel, and other targets. We don't have full confirmation of what America's B-2s destroyed during their bombing run, so more information is needed to determine just how crippled Iran's missile capabilities are. But what Iran's collapsing regime has to deal with is that its missile threat is being taken away. We said earlier that missiles form the backbone of the attacking threat that Iran presents to the United States. According to the New York Times, Iran is believed to have over 3,000 missiles in its stockpiles, though some estimates claim that the country planned to build its stockpiles up to 8,000 by the end of 2027. Immediately, America's B-2 bombers have forced Iran to pump the brakes on those plans. Iran is trying to build dozens of missiles per month, the New York Times reports, but every successful American and Israeli strike is destined to slow that production rate down. Add Iran expending missiles from the diminishing launch sites that it has, and you also get a country that is eating into stockpiles that it's attempting to replenish. Some of Iran's missiles are advanced enough to cause serious damage to US interests in the Middle East. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies highlights some of them, with particularly heavy hitters including the Sejil-2, which has a range of 2,000 kilometers or about 1,240 miles, and the Khorram Shah, which flies for between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers, or 1,240 and 1,864 miles. These are the types of missiles that America's B-2 bombers have tried to take out of the picture with their devastating run of strikes, and it looks like it has worked. The New York Times reports that Israeli officials are claiming that Operation Epic Fury, which is combining with Israel's own Operation Roaring Lion, has shut down about half of Iran's missile capabilities already. Adding to the airstrikes conducted against Iran by the US and Israel in June 2025, these most recent operations have contributed to the destruction of around 200 of Iran's ballistic missile launchers, along with the rendering of dozens more inoperable, the official claims. So with each subsequent strike that the US carries out, we may yet see B-2s fly again very soon, Iran's missile capabilities are collapsing, just like its regime. Preliminary figures being reported by Al Jazeera in its live tracker of the war between Iran and the US and Israel suggest that at least 555 people have been killed across Iran. Among them is the most valuable target in the country when it comes to prompting regime change, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. After a day or so of speculation that the head of Iran's regime had been killed in the massive airstrikes pummeling his country, Al Jazeera reported on February 28th that Iranian state TV had confirmed Khamenei's death and ordered a 40-day mourning period for his passing. Khamenei didn't even live long enough in a conflict he started to watch America's B-2s destroy Iran's missile caves, and he leaves Iran facing an immediate future where it has to figure out who is going to lead the country at a time when bombs and missiles are still flying overhead. Afterburner reports that a 3-member interim leadership council has been created to choose Khamenei's successor. That council has a problem on its hands, as America's strikes are whittling away at the entire regime's structure in Iran. For each leader that is considered, there may well be a bomb or missile en route that could take that potential leader out. Iranians are celebrating even as the state instructs them to mourn, One of those Iranians, an engineer named Masoud Ghoddarat Abadi, who moved to the US at age 27 to escape Khamenei's regime, told CNBC, "Khamenei is dead. This is the best day of my life. This is a glorious day for Iran. I believe his death could mark the beginning of a new chapter in our nation's history. In the long run, I hope this moment will prove transformative." However, losing Khamenei does not automatically lead to regime change in Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is still operational, though it's being weakened as each day passes and more US and Israeli missiles and bombs strike deep into the heart of Iran. And to make matters worse for that bewildered force, another country is about to get involved in the fight. You may remember that we told you earlier that the UK had refused to allow the US to use its bases in the Middle East for America's B-2 bombing run. That won't happen again. On March 1st, the UK's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, announced that the US will be allowed to use UK bases in future strikes against Iran's missile sites. This isn't to say that the UK is going to be sending its own aircraft into the fray. It appears to simply be opening up RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire along with Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean to the US. That's good for America. It won't have to risk stratotankers as much in future B-2 deployments. Plus, America's B-2 pilots may be able to take a little more time to zero in on their targets rather than having to get everything done in one go as part of 32-hour bombing runs. As for the next few days, Trump has announced that Iran has a few off-ramps if it feels as though it's absorbed enough punishment. In an interview with Axios, the US president said, "I can go long and take over the whole thing, or end it in 2 or 3 days and tell the Iranians, see you again in a few years if you start rebuilding your nuclear and missile programs." In other words, Iran has one option: end its nuclear weapons ambitions. Will Iran take the off-ramp? If it doesn't, this may only be the first of many times that we report on B-2 bombers crippling the Iranian regime's missile capabilities. And when combined with America's carrier force, along with Israel, the sheer amount of air power being deployed against Iran may end up destroying its already fragile regime for good. Speaking about the American carrier force, there are some who claim that aircraft carriers are already obsolete. The US seems to be proving that isn't the case. But it is an interesting thought, as we'll explore in a video that discusses how aircraft carriers stack up against some of the world's most modern military threats. Check out that video if you want to see more, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show as we bring you the full picture of what's going on in Iran. And thank you as always for watching.